Good afternoon, Dog Nation. Welcome into Go with the Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews. These are the official picks in the entire Dog Nation game on the biggest Dog Nation gang and the biggest games of the upcoming weekend, including Georgia against Mississippi State, all from a point spread perspective. In just a moment, you'll hear from Mike Griffith and Jeff Sintel, Connor Riley, Kaylee Manziel, me, of course, Brandon Adams, the host of Dog Nation Daily. And at that point in time, a consensus will be formed. And then Dari Payrow from R.S. Andrews will be invited to find out if he wants to join the consensus. As we say around here, do you want to go with the flow? And, of course, as we do all of that, we invite you to all play along with us there as well. We don't just sort of put this stuff out there. We also keep track of how we're doing here, too. So before we jump into this week's picks, let's give you a little bit of an update on our standings. Obviously, last week, Kaylee Manziel came through with the high water mark, a 4-2 week. But standings-wise, though, after 3-3 last week, I remain on top at 22-14 against the spread on the year. Kaylee, with her winning week, puts her up at 20-16, 2 games back. Mike Griffith, flat-footed even last week, 3-3, also at 20-16 on the year. Jeff Sintel, 2-4 last week, but winning record on the year at 20-16. Connor and Dari both 3-3 last week. Connor 19-17 on the campaign. Dari making up some ground here at 15-21, obviously the reigning champ. Plenty of time for all of that to change. And before we get into this week's picks, let me remind you that when it comes to your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs, R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to. And by the way, you perhaps have noticed a little bit this week, finally a little bit of what feels like fall weather, coolish at night. That's a reminder to you that at some point in time, those heating systems are going to be going to work here. It's going to be cold weather. You'll need that heat to kick in for you. And when it's time for it, you want it to work. Because if it doesn't, not very happy around the household, a lot of the folks who live there in your house. So go ahead and get ahead of that game. Get ready to get that heating system tuned up and everything else you need from a plumbing or electrical standpoint with our friends at R.S. Andrews. Find them online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time, doing the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that today. But can you trust the Georgia Bulldogs? Back at home, big favorite on Saturday, Mississippi State, the league's other Bulldogs coming in. Gigantic number here for UGA against what is arguably the worst team in the league. We're going to pick it, but first, let's find out more about this Bulldogs versus Bulldogs battle.
By failing to cover 21 points last week against Auburn, Georgia now just 1-4 against the spread this season and 0 for the last 4 against the spread. The number this week, 32.5 points against Mississippi State. To find the time Georgia covered a number that big, you have to go back to last year against Ball State. The last time they covered a number that big against an SEC opponent, you have to go back to 2022 against Vanderbilt. The other Bulldogs, they were off last week, but did cover 37 points against Texas their last time out. And I can report there is no truth to the rumor that you can find a prop bet on the over-under of the decibel meter for the crowd this week at Sanford Stadium.
No doubt about that. A lot of talk about the environment, what Georgia hopes to be able to do, what was some thought Kirby Smart, but maybe most prominently, they did not do last week against Auburn. But nonetheless, Georgia, we've got them as a 32.5-point favorite. In fairness, that number has probably climbed a bit from when we first published. But nonetheless, with Georgia sitting at 32.5 here right now, hosting Mississippi State on Saturday. Mike Griffith, we begin with you. What do you want to do with the Dogs minus a gigantic number here at home?
Yeah, I don't feel real good about it, BA, but for some reason I feel like Kirby's going to cut loose. Mississippi State was only down by 1 score at Texas at the end of the third quarter just a couple of weeks ago. But I feel like Kirby calling the Dogs, calling the fans, wanting them to be loud, I think that's going to wreak havoc on this young quarterback. And I might be the only one, but I'm going to pick Georgia to cover that giant spread at home at Sanford Stadium on Saturday.
So Mike showing some confidence in UGA. Jeff Sintel, you're next up. What do you think?
Yeah, Mike, I'm sorry, man. I'm not going to be joining you on that side of the room, man. That's a heavy number. That is a lot of wood right there. And I mean, Georgia could win this game, 42-7. That would barely cover it. But that would be a PC optics type win. I just think that's way too many points. We all know that Georgia will be down one of its top receivers. I don't think that's a good recipe for stacking a big number. I'm going to take these points, and I'm going to ride with the Mississippi State Bulldogs.
Split decision here. Connor, how about you? It's 32.5.
I actually agree with Mike here. I like Georgia in part because of a game that Cody referenced. That 2022 game against Vanderbilt was a blowout. And the reason it was because they wanted to get their second string, their backup, some extra reps that'll help them over the course of the season. I expect Georgia to try and do something similar this Saturday, where maybe the starters aren't necessarily covering, but they let the twos go out there, get some extra run, be a bit more aggressive than you usually see them be. And that's where I think the cover comes into play here. I also think this Mississippi State team is just absolutely terrible. And so with that, give me Georgia 32.5 here.
Two-way street here right now, Kaylee. What about for you? Georgia favored by 32.5.
No, I'm not going to take it. I'm going to ride with Jeff here. I'm going to take Mississippi State because of something that you, Brandon, talked about on DawgNation Daily earlier this week, and that's with the new clock rules. Georgia's just not getting nearly as many possessions, so I don't think that a blowout lead is going to be possible in this situation. So I'm going to take the Mississippi State Bulldogs.
And Kaylee Manziel kind of evening it up here at 2 apiece when it comes to this particular spread. I'm going to be very honest with you. I'm pretty conflicted here on this. On the one hand, I do believe that Georgia's among the best teams in the country, and if you are, eventually you got to cover against somebody in a game like this. You would certainly have to imagine. But on the other hand, and Cody kind of pointed out some of this too, depending on where certain games landed as far as the point spread at the book you were looking at, I've got Georgia 1-8-1 in their last 10 when favored by 30 or more at home. Obviously, the Vandy game in 22, the one outlier there. But not only that, 3-16-1 in their last 20. This is just not a team that's matched the number very much against a big spread at home, obviously during the Kirby Smart era. 32.5 feels really, really big. So I don't love this pick, to be honest with you. There's some stuff on the board later on I do love. I think there's a sneaking suspicion that Georgia might cover on Saturday. I don't quite have the guts to take them to do that, though. So I'm going to take Mississippi State plus the 32.5. I think that Georgia, I project this somewhere right around that 30-point mark, which is obviously not enough to get you the pay window. So with a little trepidation here, I am going to take Mississippi State plus the points. That puts the flow on the side of Bully there as well. Dar, you want to go with the flow and say clang on this one, Mississippi State plus 32.5?
Yeah, I mean, this is too many points, 32.5. I like Mississippi State here to cover that number. You know, if you look back at what Kirby said at the offseason coming into this year, is he spent a lot of times talking with NFL coaches, playoff teams, Super Bowl teams about how to save minutes from players throughout the season. How do I keep them fresh later in the season and playoffs when I really need them? This is a perfect opportunity for that, for him to get the second and third string guys a lot of reps. He's not really going to care too much about getting a big lead early for that. I think he's going to work them in early, keep them fresh, save some minutes. I like Mississippi State to cover this number pretty easily.
Dar, let me ask you a quick question. I'm trying to find it real quick. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it quickly. I do like Georgia. I think they can – I'm sorry, in this spot on Saturday. I do think they play well. What do you think about Georgia in a first-half number? I'm trying to find one here real quick. In other words, I would not buy them for the full game at that price, but could you be convinced to take a first-half number on Georgia on Saturday?
Maybe. I'd have to see where it's at. I would say if it's, How
about Georgia minus 18.5?
Under 16, maybe.
Okay, I got 18.5. Would you take Georgia minus 18.5 in the first half?
Not too much.
See, I might think about doing that, but I don't
want to be in the 50.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I might think about a first half, although 18.5 is fairly sizable. But it's certainly worth considering anyway. Georgia, big number, and with that, we're off and running here today on Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews. Now, look, I almost want to say step outside of SEC play, because in previous years on this show, this would not have been an SEC game, but now one of the marquee rivalries in all of college football. I still call it the Red River Shootout, although I guess technically it's the Red River Rivalry now. Either way, the Texas State Fair is the location for Texas and Oklahoma, with the SEC logo now emblazoned on the field there in Dallas. Texas, of course, riding high. Oklahoma, the exact opposite, but the Sooners have been dangerous in this spot before, and they find themselves as a 14.5-point underdog here right now. Cody Chaffins has got more on this big rivalry showdown.
To the Red River rivalry, I guess we're calling it now. Oklahoma has won 7 of the last 9 against Texas, but this time the Sooners are underdogs by more than 2 touchdowns, 14.5 points to be exact. Both teams coming off a bye week. Quinn Ewers expected to be back at quarterback for Texas this year. Now, 9 of the last 11 meetings have been decided by 8 or fewer points. So is 14.5 points too much? I report. You decide.
This is a great game. I think this is really fun. Obviously, Texas has not been great this year, but rivalry games like this are really fun. So, Mike, I go to you. Sooners in Dallas against the Longhorns. Obviously, Texas, look-ahead spot for them with Georgia looming. What do you think about a 14.5-point spread here?
Well, it's a true neutral site rivalry. I like that, almost directly right in between the two schools in a really major city that's important to both. Oklahoma's defense is the real deal. I don't know what they have offensively, but I think they have enough to stay within 14.5. So give me the Sooners and 14.5 in this one, Brandon.
All right, so Mike on the side of the underdog. What do you think, Jeff? Red River is the location for Texas and Oklahoma. How about it?
Yeah, kudos to Cody. I think he's hitting all the right notes on this game coming in. The strength of this series, the way these teams have always been so competitive over the years. I think that's another big number. This is going to be a running theme for me in this week's show. Big numbers. I got a little Halloween costume on. Scary when I look at all these big numbers. So I'm gonna take Oklahoma. Mike was right to rock with that defense. I think Venables wants to show something with this program. I think this is a statement game. I think Oklahoma keeps it within that 14.5. Give me the Sooners.
So Jeff on some rare underdog sides here so far today. Connor, how about for you?
Yeah, as Jeff and Mike point out, this seems like a big number. It's a historic rivalry. You think it's going to be a close and competitive game. And they've still got it at 14.5, which is a massive number. And so that's telling me something. They don't think this Oklahoma team is all that good. And quite frankly, with what I saw against Auburn, they're not. And even you want to factor in the Tennessee game now as well. You saw what Arkansas was able to do that on offense. I like Texas here. So give me the Horns in the month of October. Let's get spooky and some burnt orange. Let's go Texas 14.5. That number stinks to me, and because of that, I like the Longhorns this week.
Okay, so there you go. A little bit of a zig from Connor when I thought he was going to zag. Kaylee, what about you?
This is a game in which all eyes are going to be on it because now both teams are in the SEC. I do think Oklahoma struggled a little bit in the SEC because they've been banged up and they're playing teams that they typically wouldn't face. But this is a team that they're really familiar with. They know how important this game is. I'm going to go horns down, and I'm going to take the Sooners.
To the points that have been kind of made here thus far, people kind of have this perception of Texas as kind of a disappointing, Texas is back, one of these memes that gets used to mock the Longhorns a lot. But prior to the game a couple of weeks ago against Mississippi State, in which it was a little bit closer than experts thought, Texas had actually been on a stretch of 6 straight games covering when favored by 14 or more points. But as others have kind of mentioned here, there is something really weird about this rivalry game. Just look at the Steve Sarkisian era alone. Oklahoma is 2-1 straight up and 2-1 against the spread against Texas there in that spot. This despite the fact that Oklahoma has 13 losses in total over that span. Somehow they have found a way to play well in this particular game, which I think kind of makes it more fun to be on the Oklahoma side here. The fact they may have this figured out again. It's a little bit of a blind assumption that somehow Oklahoma has a formula against Texas that it does not have other places. We see this sometimes in college football. We're going to see this with another game we're also about to pick there as well. So this is simply about a price. Oklahoma at 14.5 feels like a little bit of a bargain to me. It feels like the Sooners are on sale. Don't expect them to win the game, but last year they did win outright. Keep that in mind. That is plenty for me to take a flyer here on Oklahoma plus 14.5, and that puts the flow on the side of Boomer Sooner there as well. So, Dar, you want to go with the flow and take the Sooners here?
Man, Texas just wants to keep pouring it on right now and running up scores and have all the glitz and show, and that's what they're about. And I really don't think the Sooners have the offense to kind of keep up with that style of play. However, it's the Red River Shootout, and I get in these type of rivalry games, I really go back to the history and the stats of how these games are played. This is such a big deal, even if one team's good, another team sucks. For recruiting purposes there, I mean, this is where the rubber meets the road. Texas is the biggest spread favorite since 1970 coming into this game. I mean, that's how massive this 14.5 point spread is, which is like mind boggling. And I get Connor saying, hey, that's there for a reason. And maybe they win by 40, but this game is always close. 9 out of the last 11 games in this rivalry has been decided by less than 8 points. So I'll take the Sooners and the points here because history's on the side of them getting a cover in this game.
I think this is a really fun game. I think that's a pretty good pick, Dar, and I think this is a really very fun game. Another rivalry game of note in the SEC on Saturday, and if you're about my age, you can remember back to a time, even if you hated both these teams, you certainly had what back then was the third Saturday in September circled as a really big showdown between Tennessee and Florida. Obviously, a lot has changed for both these teams since then, and yet the game still has intrigue for this upcoming Saturday there as well. For the Vols, though, it's about trying to get retribution after a loss to Arkansas. For Florida, it's about just trying to save face in what's been a disastrous season. Cody Chaffins tells us more about that right now.
To Rocky Top, where Billy Napier and the Florida Gators are coming in off an upset win, while the Tennessee Volunteers are coming in off an upset loss last week to Arkansas. 7 o'clock kick here. The point spread is 14.5 points in favor of Tennessee. Florida has won 6 of their last 7 in this matchup and 17 of 19. We all remember last year, Billy Napier and the Gators knocking off Tennessee as 5-point underdogs in the Swamp. Josh Heupel, 14-5 against the spread since he's been at Tennessee, as a home favorite, that is. But when Heupel's teams are held under 30 points, they're just 1-13 outright.
Keep that in mind, because right now Tennessee's probably struggling more offensively than you realize for a team that overall has been one of the nation's best despite the loss there last week. So, Mike, there's no telling how many times you've covered this game over the years. Tennessee at home, 14.5-point favorite against Florida. What do you want to do with this?
Boy, what I want to do is take Florida. That's what I want to do because the Gators have built some momentum, and it looks like Tennessee struggled at Arkansas. Give Sam Pittman a ton of credit. But, Brandon, I was just a flat-footed 3-3 last week, as you put it. So I'm going to make a flat-footed pick here, and I'm going to say Rocky Top's going to be rocking, and they're going to ride the momentum to a late cover. Give me the Vols and give those points.
So that is Mike on the side of Tennessee. Jeff Sintel, what about for you? 14.5 is the number as Tennessee hosts the lousy, stinking Gators.
The lousy stinkins. Here's what I think. I don't think Florida is good enough to win 2 in a row, especially 2 in a row against Tennessee in this rivalry. I don't think I think Tennessee is bad enough to lose 2 in a row to teams that should have personnel advantages on. That's why I think Rocky Top's going to get a mojo transfusion. There's a lot of swag in the state of Tennessee right now. They want to feel like Vanderbilt did on last Saturday night. I think the Vols cover this and look pretty good doing it.
So a little bit of love for Tennessee here right now, getting back to its winning ways. Connor, do you agree with that?
I came in here ready to pick Tennessee. I was going to point to the fact that Florida is dealing with a massive hurricane right now, and there are some obvious concerns there with that. Hurricane Milton, obviously, our thoughts and prayers going out to all those affected by it. But I can't follow Jeff and Mike on this one. So I'm going to take Florida here to find a way to keep this close. And look, as Cody points out, and as I'm sure BA is going to point out, this is a game that Florida has owned of late, and I think there are some very real concerns about this Tennessee offense, even with those last 2 games coming on the road.
So that is Connor kind of doing a last-minute audible on his original pick. Kaylee, what do you think here, Florida and Tennessee?
I have no issue following in the footsteps of Mike and Jeff, especially when I think that they're correct. So I'm also going to take Tennessee. They were exposed last week and lost a game that they shouldn't have. I expect a big bounce back from them, and I do think that home field advantage is going to play a real role in this game, so I like the Vols here.
So Kaylee brings up an interesting point about home field advantage. Not to disagree with my esteemed colleague here, but I kind of wonder off a loss, much like Georgia against Auburn last week, if Vols fans show up in high volume, just given the fact they're reeling after losing to Arkansas, I would wonder about that. But the thing I wonder about most of all here is, and I can't explain it, I can't identify it on the elemental chart, but somehow, some way, there is just something weird about Florida playing Tennessee. Cody talked about last year, a decent Tennessee team losing straight up to Florida. But even stranger than that, a very good Tennessee team in 2022 only was able to beat Florida 38-33, and that was a Gators team that was terrible. And yet still the issues that Tennessee has had against Florida seem to persist. The long-range numbers, you know them by now. Florida's 8-2 straight up, 7-3 against the spread in their last 10, when facing Tennessee. Over the course of their last 20, 17-3 straight up, 12-6-2 against the spread. For whatever reason, Florida has just had Tennessee's number, spanning multiple coaches, spanning completely different rosters, changing over every couple of years, and yet the storyline continues. I can't explain it, but I'm not going to fight against it here right now. I'm going to take Florida to find a way to keep it closer than experts think in Neyland Stadium on Saturday, plus the 14.5 here. That puts the flow on the side of the lousy, stinking Gators as well. Dar, you want to go with the flow and take Florida?
Man, if this game was in the swamp, I would definitely take Florida here. I mean, they won 8 out of last 10 times against them. And it seems like they kind of got a little bit of footing now, trying to get a little bit of momentum. But I just think that the Vols they want to bounce back from last week, and they want retribution from last year against Florida. I think at home, Neyland's going to be rocking, and that's going to carry them to a win by 20-plus points.
So I should also correct myself. The flow is actually on the side of Tennessee. Not that that necessarily matters, but there were more Tennessee picks than Florida picks, just to correct myself there on that. Another really good – this is just like a rivalry weekend in the SEC. One of my favorites is the Magnolia Bowl in Baton Rouge on Saturday. An LSU team that's been actually pretty quiet as of late after disappointing to begin the year against USC. Gets ready to host Ole Miss, who's – probably strutting a little bit now after a dominant win at South Carolina last week that takes out the bad taste of a straight-up loss to Kentucky prior to that. Rebels and Tigers have played some good ones over the years. Saturday, the renewal. Cody Chaffins has more.
It'll be a Saturday night in Death Valley for the Ole Miss Rebels. LSU are home underdogs in this game, getting 2.5 points. We've come to expect points galore in these matchups between these two teams. Since 2016, the two teams have combined for 74.6 points per game. Last year, LSU and Ole Miss combined for 104 points. You remember that one, 55-49. The Rebels won in Oxford last year. This year, LSU comes off a bye, while the Rebs, of course, bounced back from that loss to Kentucky as they easily rolled over South Carolina last week.
So there you go. It's the Magnolia Bowl. LSU is a 2.5-point underdog in Death Valley. Mike Griffith, what do you think?
They should be an underdog. This Brian Kelly team is puzzling. I'm looking for a quality win on the road at South Carolina. That's not it. Ole Miss seems to have righted the ship. Give me the Rebels and Lane Kiffin to go into ferocious Tiger Stadium and tame LSU and Brian Kelly and his Tigers.
Mike, on the side of Ole Miss, Jeff Sintel, what do you think?
Yeah, transitive property enthusiasts beware, because I don't believe in any of that stuff, especially in Death Valley and Baton Rouge. You see a lot of NFL pundits note that Garrett Nussmeier is a potential number 1 overall pick. Maybe they're reaching a little bit there. All I really know is that I think Ole Miss has the better football team. I think they're going to prove that. I think this 2.5 is not really scary. So, I think Ole Miss will win handily on the road in the SEC. And that's about as convincing of a job I can give for a game that really doesn't make any sense any way you look at it.
So, Jeff Sintel on the side of Ole Miss there. A lot of love for the Rebels right now. Connor, what about you?
Yeah, important to note that at the time we were picking this is a 3.5-point spread as opposed to a 2.5-point spread. Big difference there in that number. But this is a GPG game, general principle game. LSU at home, underdog. Don't get to bet it very often. I'm going to do just that here. I like LSU plus 2.5. And obviously, if you're going to bet them at 2.5, I would say just go ahead and bet them on the money line. And I would do that at 3.5 as well.
Yeah, shop for the best line if you want to do that. Or as Connor said, get yourself the better value when it comes to winning the game straight up. Kaylee Mansell, what about you?
This is one of those rivalry games where no outcome of it would surprise me. It could be a blowout. It could be a close game. There could be national scandal. Tiger Stadium could go up in flames, and none of it would surprise me. But what I'm going to bank on in this case is for Ole Miss, they still have to play Oklahoma and Georgia. I think that Lane Kiffin knows that if Ole Miss still has any chance of making the playoffs, they have to win this game. He's going to come in ready. So I'm going to take Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss.
So that is Kaylee Mansell, also on the side of the Rebels. We had it mentioned earlier how many high-scoring games these teams have played in the past, including last year. That's not really been the MO for Ole Miss thus far this season. They are 6-0 to the under in every game thus far this year. In fact, going below the total by an average of 8.8 points per game. They're also 5-1 against the spread here. So despite the straight-up loss, upset fashion Kentucky, they've mostly been meeting expectations, if not exceeding them for much of the year. However, let's say this out loud here for a moment. Last week, Williams-Brice Stadium, tough place to play. Ole Miss wins in convincing fashion. Now it's a road game again at Death Valley. You're talking about a very small category of team that's going to be impressive in SEC play back-to-back weeks in hostile environments. The first leg of that, no problem for Ole Miss. But sometimes the residue for some of that shows up the following week there as well, especially against what is probably a better team and what is probably an even tougher stadium here. That, to me, puts the value on LSU in this particular spot. Obviously, Ole Miss is proving something. The win last week gives you an indication this team has perhaps some season-long staying power. But only the very best teams are going to do it on the road in back-to-back weeks in hostile environments. And Ole Miss, for me, is below that category. Enough for me to put a flyer on LSU here, plus the 2.5, which is where we're picking it. Perhaps you get even better value by the time you see this here right now, because it seems like the action is and the steam is on the Ole Miss side. But I like LSU here. I think they stand up at home in the Magnolia Bowl rivalry. Dari, that though flow still remains on Ole Miss. You want to go with the flow and take Lane Kiffin and the Rebels.
Well, I mean, both of these teams need this win. I mean, this is a signature win for both of them, as they try to make the playoffs. I can see this game going either way, but I do trust Ole Miss's offense more, and I trust their defense more than I do LSU's to make some plays and get in the backfield and create some pressures. However, in a close game like this, the absolute deciding factor for me is I'm rolling with Joey Freshwater.
There you go. Little Lane Kiffin, shout out to his pseudonym, which is very funny to consider. Hey, if you love games in the SEC, make sure you check out the Friday edition of DawgNation Daily for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. We'll also give you our pick for another compelling game in the SEC. We just talked about South Carolina trying to get back to its winning ways after really kind of getting handled pretty easily by Ole Miss last week. Well, they get a chance to travel into Bryant-Denny Stadium in Alabama, a Crimson Tide team reeling from its loss to Vanderbilt. How does that one play out from a point spread perspective? We'll give you our pick for that, plus our best bets for the weekend, all as a part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down, which is already aired today as a part of the Friday edition of DawgNation Daily. We've also got our big pick in the game outside the SEC. That's coming up here in just a moment. But prior to that, let me remind you again, this is Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews. And obviously, when you come towards a football weekend, for many of you, it's about staying at home, settling in, getting comfortable, and enjoying the chance to watch as much football as possible. And if that's the case for you, you don't want anything to interrupt that, like a water heater going out. So if you're dealing with a plumbing emergency, I want you to think about R.S. Andrews. We talk about the air conditioning all the time or the heating system. But when it comes to your plumbing emergencies, R.S. Andrews can act right away. The R.S., after all, stands for rapid service. So if your water heater goes out, you need it replaced the same day. You need it for it to happen now so the weekend isn't ruined. Trust R.S. Andrews for all of that online at rsandrews.com. All right, back to the picks we go here. I believe, one of the more high-profile games, the brand-new-look Big Ten, sees Oregon, a freshly minted member of that league, hosting the venerable Ohio State Buckeyes here in the first real game of the season for OSU. Cody Chaffins kind of gives you the breakdown of the Ducks hosting the Buckeyes.
Well, it's the biggest game of the Big Ten so far this season as number 2 Ohio State heads out to take on number 3 Oregon. Buckeyes 3.5-point road favorites in this matchup. Ohio State leads the all-time series 9-1, but the one was the last time these two teams played. That was 2021 when Oregon went into Columbus and pulled an upset. The Ducks have not been home underdogs since 2018. They won that day, by the way, against Washington in overtime. Buckeyes have covered their last 2 Big Ten games, and they've only given up a touchdown in each of those.
Thank you, Cody Chaffins. The number sits at 3.5. Oregon hosting Ohio State. Mike Griffith, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Oregon beat Boise State by 3 points. I think Ohio State's better, Brandon. And Autzen Stadium is a heck of a place to play. It's loud. It's hostile. I'm just not all in on the Ducks. As much as I think Dan Lanning is a great coach, I like what he's building. I think he has the better quarterback, but I think Ohio State has the better team. I think the Buckeyes have been building up for this. So add a few more helmet stickers on those silver helmets for the Buckeyes, Brandon. Another flat-footed pick, albeit I may only be 500 this week, but I think this is going to be one of those picks that I get right.
There you go.
Give me Ohio State.
Mike likes the Silver Bullets on their way to Eugene there on Saturday. Jeff, how about for you? Ohio State traveling to Oregon.
Yeah, I think Mike's onto something with his flat feet and his potential shoe endorsements here, looking for Skeechers or something like that. I just don't know. I mean, I agree.
Wait, did you call them Skeechers? Did you call them Skeechers?
I mean, Striders. I think that's what you call those really comfortable shoes for people with flat feet. I mean, that's what I'm thinking.
Skechers.
Yeah, they're called Skechers.
Sorry, guys. You see, my feet aren't flat, so I'm not familiar with that product.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I just think that, while the way things are going in Oregon, still on the up and up, I just don't think this team is passing the sniff test defensively, offensively. I just don't think he's got the playmakers to go around his veteran quarterback. When I see playmakers, when I think of playmakers, Ohio State's offense is full of them. I just really like, obviously J.J. Smith is making a case as the best wide receiver in the land, not just the best freshman receiver in the land. I think Ohio State, because it doesn't get a lot of chances to show how top five-ish, how top two-ish it actually is, no matter what kind of shoes they're wearing. Brennan, I won't give out a plug for the shoes up in Oregon at the same time, but I just really think this is a chance for Ohio State to have a beauty contest type win, and I think they're going to do it this week at the expense of Oregon.
There you go. Connor Riley, what about you?
Dan Lanning needs a signature win in his time at Oregon. Right now, the best you can maybe make the case for is at Utah last year or over a Liberty team in the Fiesta Bowl. And I think they're going to get it. And I have 9 statistical data points that support this line of thinking. Do you know that Big Ten teams that are traveling 2+ time zones this season are 1-8 when they are on the road? And that one team that won was Indiana, who went on a Friday to beat UCLA, the worst team in that league. So because of a body clock, I like the Ducks here plus 3.5 points. And like I said earlier with LSU, if you're betting them at 3.5, go ahead and throw some money line action on them as well.
It's a great number, great stat. And I also love the body clock reference. That's really, really strong from Connor. Kaylee Mansell, can you top that?
Yeah, I think Connor makes a really good point here. And because of that, I'm going to take Ohio State.
Costanza.
Well played by Kaylee indeed. Look, here's the thing. I also agree with something that Connor said. I'm a huge fan of Dan Lanning. I really believe he's probably the best up-and-coming coach in college football right now. But he doesn't really have the big wins that prove that. Winless against Kalen DeBoer, for instance. That was the big rivalry game. Had a hard time finding success there and that. And obviously this would be a great chance to get that big win. But one of my big beliefs in life is that success leaves clues, that he would be dropping hints along the way if he was likely to win this game. And I'm sorry, even though they came into the year with a lot of fanfare about the roster, the truth is, pound for pound, I would put Oregon, relative to expectations, among the most disappointing teams in America here thus far. On the flip side of that, look, I truly believe that a soft schedule is a weapon. It is a weapon you can use to your advantage. Ohio State has not played anybody. They don't have a ton of big games even after this. They've had the opportunity with this so-called $20 million roster to have this game circled as the one landmine that could perhaps stand in their way during the regular season. You think a team that has allegedly spent that much money on a roster is going to have a game like this go unchecked in terms of every possible issue to perhaps deal with? I think that Ohio State's going to use the strength of its very weak schedule to its advantage to be very ready for this game. And Dan Lanning, who just hasn't quite figured it out in the highest weight class yet as a coach, I don't quite think he's ready for this one either. I actually like Ohio State a lot. I dislike the Buckeyes deeply on the field, but in terms of the number, I think that Ohio State probably skates to a pretty easy win right here. So I certainly like them minus the 3.5. Flow on the side of the Buckeyes there as well. Dari, you want to go with the flow and take the Ohio State?
All right. So let me just educate you and everyone on here. Since 2018, the Buckeyes have been absolutely awful against the spread versus a team ranked in the top 10. They are 6-13-1 against the spread and covering only 2 of their last 9 games that they played against a team ranked in the top 10. This mark is the second worst in all of college football, only behind Michigan State, who's 3-13 against the spread against top 10 teams. Dylan Gabriel is going to make that Ohio State defense stress. I think he's going to make enough plays with his arm, enough plays with his legs. I love Oregon to get a big signature win for Dan Lanning this weekend.
Boy, strong pick there from Dari, and some numbers to back that up. Very interesting for the best game thus far in the season outside the SEC, and one of the better games we're going to get from the Big Ten all year long. So that's going to do it for a Go With The Flow presented by R.S. Andrews here today, but there are more picks. If you want to check out the Friday edition of DawgNation Daily and our R.S. Andrews Cool Down, at the conclusion of the show, thoughts about Alabama hosting South Carolina, best bets from the rest of the college football board. We'll give all that to you. In fact, it's already aired by the time you're seeing this. Check it out in the archives of the DawgNation video channel. It's probably most convenient there at the DawgNation YouTube page. And best of luck to all of you with your own picks here this weekend. We'll see you back here again this week at next week at the same time. Getting ready for Georgia, Texas, by the way, for Go With The Flow, presented by